It's hard to forget the image of a gorilla with fur as white as snow. That image has stayed with me ever since I first read about him. This wasn't some trick of the light, or a simple case of albinism. This was the year 2006, and this particular infant was the result of deliberate genetic modification, a stark defiance of nature itself. Emma Carter had worked with primates for 42 years, showing them a compassion that I think sometimes humans struggle to offer each other. But nothing in her life would be as significant as what happened on one particular night when she raided a laboratory. Everything changed for her that night, and for that 5-month-old white baby gorilla. At the time, controversial experiments in genetic engineering were gaining momentum, and Emma, working for a private animal rights organization, had been watching a laboratory she suspected of wrongdoing for months. That night, she finally managed to get inside, and what she saw shook her to her core. In a small cage in the middle of a cold, sterile room lay a gorilla infant with fur as white as snow. All the other gorillas she saw in the surrounding cages were dark-colored, natural-looking. But this infant was different, almost as if defying the laws of nature, covered in perfect whiteness. When she looked at the files, she learned the truth. This was one of the first genetically modified gorilla infants. Not albino, but the result of deliberate intervention. Scientists had tampered with its genetics to display it as a rare species, perhaps even to sell it to wealthy collectors. But right now, that tiny being was living without a mother, without love, only as an experimental object. I can only imagine what Emma felt. Something broke in her heart. And at that moment, she made a decision. She couldn't leave this infant there. That night, risking her career, her freedom, perhaps even her life, she took Kesi out of there. She named him herself, Kesi, meaning hope in an ancient language, because he was hope for Emma. He was proof that humanity could still do good, that love was stronger than science. The first days weren't easy. Kesi had been traumatized. He cried through the nights, trembled in Emma's arms. But Emma didn't give up. She fed him, warming milk, put him to sleep, singing lullabies for hours, slowly gaining his trust by showing him she was there every time he woke up. As months passed, the bond between them grew stronger. As Kesi grew, his white fur shone even brighter. But he didn't just develop physically. His intelligence, his ability to empathize, and his loving gaze amazed everyone, as if he was now receiving back all the love he had lost in that laboratory cell, multiplied. When he turned 3, Kesi was already too big to climb on Emma's shoulder. But he still came to her side every morning, rested his huge head on her knees, and waited for her hands to wander through his fur. A promise that he would never forget her. After that day, Emma visited him every week. According to the center's rules, she couldn't make direct contact, but just watching him from behind the bars was enough. Every time Kesi saw her, he would stand up, place his hands on the bars, and look at her. Such a look. It was as if he was speaking, as if saying, "Mom, you're here. Everything is..." Time was merciless, especially toward Emma. When she reached 65, I can't imagine what it must have been like for her as her body began to betray her. First, the strength in her legs diminished, then her hands began to tremble. The diagnosis came after a while, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or motor neuron disease, as some people know it, mercilessly progressive. Within a year, she was confined to a wheelchair, unable to walk. Her speech became difficult. Even forming words required great effort. But her mind remained sharp, her feelings deep. I think that was the most painful part for her. She understood everything, felt everything, but couldn't fully express anything. Visiting Kesi was no longer possible. Her health simply wouldn't allow it. The absence was consuming her. She knew her time was running out, and she wanted to see him one last time. Just one last time. Her sister Sarah understood and made a plan. She contacted the Rehabilitation Center, obtained special permission, and one spring morning, on a beautiful day when cherry blossoms danced in the air, she took Emma to the center in her wheelchair. As they moved along the main path, people gave Emma pitying looks, but she didn't notice. Her attention was focused on one thing. In the distance, in a large outdoor area, Kesi stood like a white giant. Sarah slowly pushed the chair toward the garden. The spring sun warmed Emma's face, and cherry blossoms landed in her hair, but she only wanted to see him, Kesi, her son. They stopped just before the bars. Kesi had his back turned, sitting on a large rock. Emma wanted to call him, but words no longer came out, only rasping sounds. Tears streamed from her eyes. To be so close, yet unable to see him, was unbearable. Sarah touched her shoulder. "Let me call him," she said softly. But at that moment, as if a miracle were happening, Kesi turned his head. Perhaps he felt the vibration of the sound, or perhaps instinct whispered something to him. When that huge head turned, his amber eyes found Emma. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Kesi's eyes locked onto Emma, and at that moment all the noise in the world ceased. There was only the woman and the gorilla, mother and son, two souls reunited after years. Kesi slowly stood up. His massive body, weighing 210 kilograms, gained a strange grace. As he walked toward the bars, there was purpose in every step. He was coming to Emma. He had seen her, and he remembered her. When he reached the bars, he stopped. His hands gripped the metal, his head bowed, his eyes still on Emma. Then he made a sound, deep and human-like, as if in pain. One of those characteristic sounds gorillas make when they're sad. Sarah brought the chair closer. Now only a meter separated Kesi and Emma. The bars were the only obstacle. Emma tried to reach out with her trembling hand, but she didn't have the strength. When Kesi understood, he extended his own giant hand through the bars. His fingers touched hers. That touch was like electricity. 10 years. She hadn't been able to fully touch him for 10 years. And now those giant fingers intertwined with hers. Warm, soft, familiar. Kesi's fingers began to tremble. Was he crying? Could gorillas cry? Emma didn't know, but she knew they were both feeling the same pain. A word fell from her mouth. Kai. That huge head bowed even further, leaning against the bars as if trying to hug Emma. And right at that moment, something strange happened. Kesi pulled his hand back, turned his head slightly to the side, examined the lock on the edge of the bars, and then he took action. That simple lock mechanism Emma had taught him years ago as a game. 3 buttons, when turned in a specific sequence, would open the door. It was designed to prevent accidental openings. But Kesi remembered. He turned the first button right, the second button left, and the third button right. A click was heard. The lock had opened. Sarah's breath caught. "Oh my God," she whispered. When the center security guards noticed the situation on the monitors, they panicked. The alarm began to sound, but Emma wasn't afraid because she was looking into Kesi's eyes, and there was no danger there, only love. Kesi slowly pushed the door. The metal bars creaked open, and that giant gorilla, for the first time in 10 years, stepped outside freely. Security teams came running, tranquilizer darts in their hands, some with guns. "Get back!" someone shouted. "The animal has gotten loose." But Kesi didn't even look at them. He only looked at Emma, and with slow, careful steps, as if approaching something breakable, he moved toward her. Sarah had frozen behind the chair, unable to move. Emma tried to signal her with her hand, saying with difficulty, "Let him." Sarah hadn't understood. "What?" Emma repeated. "Let him." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She didn't want to leave her sister alone with this giant animal. But when she saw that determination in Emma's eyes, she slowly backed away. One of the security team members shouted, "No, get away from there. This is very dangerous." There are moments I've read about that seem to transcend the normal boundaries of understanding, and this is one of them. A gorilla named Kesi, a woman named Emma. Their story defies simple explanation. It speaks to a connection deeper than species, deeper than time. I remember reading about how Sarah, with a stern look, stopped everyone as Kesi stood before Emma, sunlight creating a halo around his white fur. Slowly, he crouched down until their faces were almost level. His giant hand reached out, his fingers touched Emma's face, so gently, so delicately, as if touching a child. He caressed her cheek, took a cherry blossom petal from her hair, examined it, and gently placed it on the ground. Then he rested his huge head on Emma's knees. Everyone froze. Security teams, visitors, center staff, all were watching. It wasn't just animal behavior. It was the meeting of two souls, a mother and a son's farewell after years apart. Emma raised her trembling hand and put it on Kesi's head, feeling the warm, soft, familiar white fur between her fingers. Tears flowed from her eyes, but it wasn't pain anymore. It was gratitude, thankfulness. Kesi made a strange sound, almost a human-like whimpering that gorillas make only in the deepest emotional moments, as if saying, "Mom, you're here. I missed you. I never forgot you." Words fell from Emma's mouth, difficult and choppy, but from her heart. "I love you, Kesi." And Kesi, lifting his head slightly, looked at her. There were no tears in those amber eyes, but there was understanding, acceptance, as if he knew she wouldn't be with him much longer. His giant hand reached for the wheelchair armrest, carefully examined the metal edges, and then placed his hand on Emma's hand. Their hands joined under the sun as cherry blossoms fell around them. Emma realized Kesi was being careful not to hit the edge of the wheelchair. Every movement was calculated, controlled, because he knew she was fragile, and he wanted to protect her. Minutes passed, and no one interfered. The security teams lowered their weapons because they saw it wasn't a threat, but love. The center's director, Dr. Alan Thompson, stepped forward. His eyes welled up. He had worked with animals for years, but had never witnessed such a bond. "The most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed," he said, his voice trembling. "This is something even science can't explain." Sarah was crying, and other visitors silently shed tears because they understood it wasn't just a woman and a gorilla. It was a universal bond, the bond between mother and child, a love that disregarded species differences, that knew no time or distance. Kesi slowly lifted his head, looked at Emma one last time, and then wiped the tears from her eyes with his finger, a movement no different from a human, compassionate, protective, full of love. Emma also wanted to say one last thing, but words weren't enough. Kesi understood. He knew everything she wanted to tell him. "You are my son," she said, with her last strength. Kesi rested his huge head on Emma's knees again, and they stayed like that. They both knew it wasn't a goodbye, but a moment of gratitude, of giving thanks for the most beautiful gift life had given them. Cherry blossoms continued to fall around them, pink petals landing on white fur, the sun shining on the wheelchair's metal surface. Everything was perfect. As the sun rose toward noon, Kesi was still by Emma's side, not wanting to leave. But Dr. Thompson approached with slow steps, a basket of Kesi's favorite fruits in his hand. "Kesi," he said softly, "come on, buddy. Let Emma rest." Kesi lifted his head and looked at the doctor, then back at Emma, hesitation in his eyes, as if he knew that if he left, he would never see her again. And perhaps he was right. Emma, gathering her last strength, gently pushed him away with her hand. "Go," she whispered. "Be well." Kesi placed his giant hand on Emma's hand one last time, held it tightly as if trying to transfer all the love within him with that touch, then slowly stood up, his eyes still on her. He took a few steps back, then stopped, turned around, and looked at Emma one last time. In that look was everything: gratitude, love, farewell, and a silent promise that he would never forget her. Dr. Thompson slowly guided Kesi back inside. Kesi wasn't interested in the fruits. He only looked back at Emma, his head turned, his eyes not leaving her. When the door closed, Kesi stood there, leaned against the bars, and stayed like that for a long time, motionless, silent, just watching Emma. Sarah moved behind the wheelchair. "Should we go?" she asked, her voice still trembling. Emma nodded slightly. It was time to go, but something wasn't breaking inside her. I will never forget the story of Emma and Kesi. It's a story about a bond that defied species, a love that spoke without words. I remember reading about the day they had to say goodbye, and it struck me deeply. The chair began to turn, and Kesi made a sound, a long, pain-filled call, the kind gorillas make only in very special situations, a mother's or a son's call. As they moved toward the center's exit, people silently made way, still under the influence of that moment. Some were crying, others looked on in shock, witnessing something beyond normal animal behavior. They saw a miracle. When they got home, Sarah made tea for Emma, but she couldn't drink it. She felt empty, as if a part of her had stayed there with Kesi. That night, Emma lay in her bed, looking at the ceiling, remembering the night she first saw Kesi, that tiny white infant, and how she had taken him in her arms. "I will protect you," she had promised. "I will love you." And she had kept her promise, every day, every moment, doing what was best for him. Days passed. Weeks passed. Sarah brought her news of Kesi, saying he was doing well. But Sarah didn't mention that Kesi came to the bars every evening at sunset, looking at the last place Emma had stood. 2 months later, Emma woke up struggling to breathe. The disease had progressed, but she refused to go to the hospital. She wanted to be at home, in peace. That night, as she lay in her bed, looking out the window at the full moon, a strange feeling overcame her. It was as if Kesi were beside her, as if that giant hand were touching hers again. She closed her eyes and imagined Kesi, his white fur, his amber eyes, his giant but gentle hands. She imagined that last day, that perfect day when cherry blossoms danced in the air, when the sun illuminated everything. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for letting me love you, Kesi." That night, Emma fell asleep in peace. The next morning, Sarah couldn't wake her. Emma was gone, but there was a smile on her face, a peaceful, happy expression, as if she had seen a beautiful dream. When Dr. Thompson received the news, he cried. Emma had not only saved an animal's life, she had given him a life, a loving, meaningful life. How would they tell Kesi? How do you tell a gorilla that the person he loved most has died? But Kesi already knew that morning. He hadn't come to the bars as usual. For the first time in days, he didn't break his morning routine. He just sat in the farthest corner of his area, head bowed, motionless, as if mourning. Dr. Thompson made a decision. He asked Sarah for Emma's favorite shawl and, one morning in the early hours, left it in Kesi's area. When Kesi saw the shawl, he froze. He approached, smelled it, and at that moment, his giant body trembled. His hands grasped the shawl, brought it to his face, and smelled it for a long, long time. It was Emma's scent, lavender and daisy. Kesi had never forgotten that scent. He gently pressed the shawl to his chest, bowed his head. From that day on, Kesi slept with that shawl every night. In the morning, he would take it with him, protecting it as if it were a treasure. This was Kesi's way of maintaining his connection with Emma. Months passed. Kesi slowly returned to normal. He ate, he played, he lived. But every evening at sunset, he would take that shawl with him and come to the bars. He would sit there, wait, and perhaps, in a way, Emma was always there. In every cherry blossom petal, in every ray of sunlight, Emma was in Kesi's heart, just as Kesi was in Emma's heart. A year later, the Rehabilitation Center erected a special monument in Emma's memory, made of white marble. It was a small but meaningful monument, a figure of a woman and a gorilla hand in hand. Underneath was an Indian, Emma Carter, 1964 to 2026. She taught that love knows no language, species, or barrier. On the day of the monument's unveiling, Sarah was there, and Kesi was there too, watching silently from behind the bars. When the ceremony ended, Sarah went to Kesi's side, looked at him. Those amber eyes gave Sarah a sad but grateful look. "You love my sister very much, didn't you?" said Sarah with tears. Kesi bowed his head slightly, as if confirming. "She loved you very much too," said Sarah. Know that. And Kesi at that moment made a strange sound, soft, sweet, sad, one of those rare sounds with which gorillas express their deepest feelings. Years passed. Kesi lived a long and happy life. Grey strands had appeared among his white fur, But that sparkle in his eyes never disappeared, and he carried Emma's shawl with him until he died. One autumn morning, Kesi peacefully passed away. Veterinarians said his heart had stopped, but caretakers said something else. He finally went to be with Emma. They buried Kesi right next to Emma's monument and wrote on it, Kesi, 2006 to 2023. He knew what love was, and he never forgot it. That night, the full moon illuminated both graves. Emma and Kesi, mother and son, two souls, finally together again. And you could see cherry blossom petals dancing in the wind, even though it wasn't the season, as if Emma and Kesi were somehow still showing their love. I've always been moved by the stories that show how deeply connected we are, even across vast stretches of time. The idea that two souls, separated by centuries, could somehow echo each other. It's a notion that stays with me. And I find myself thinking about that connection now, as I consider the story of these two people, brought together in such an unexpected way.